My name is Robert Anderson, and this is the story of how I learned that sometimes family can hurt you more than strangers ever could. I spent my whole life working the oil fields of Oklahoma, scraping together every dollar I could for my family's future. I always figured if I did my part, my son would do his when it mattered. Turns out I was wrong. It started on a scorching July afternoon. The Oklahoma City sun was ruthless, beating down on the hospital parking lot as I made my way inside for another heart checkup. I'd been feeling weaker lately, dizzy spells, chest tightness, you name it. The nurse at reception greeted me with that same sympathetic smile, and soon enough, Dr. Elizabeth Carter delivered the news that felt like a punch in the gut. "Mr. Anderson, without surgery, you have maybe 3 months left," she said, pointing to cloudy shapes on the computer screen, blockages I could barely pronounce. "You need a triple bypass, and we need to move fast. The total cost is $300,000. The hospital won't schedule anything until payment is secured." $300,000. I stared at the number like it was a death sentence. All I had left in my savings was $25,000, barely a drop in the ocean after years of hard labor and careful saving. My insurance didn't cover major surgery, just routine checkups. Payment plans? Out of the question. The hospital's policy was strict. I gripped the edge of the desk, feeling more helpless than I ever had in my life. As I left the hospital, the world felt different. The air was thick. The noise of the city faded behind the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. My truck, a battered old Chevy that had been with me longer than most friends, barely sputtered to life. I pulled out my phone and stared at my contact list, hovering over the name that mattered most, my only son, David. 3 years earlier, David had come to me, full of ambition and promises. He was a contractor in Tulsa, dreaming of owning his first real home. "Dad, I just need a down payment. This is a loan. I'll pay you back as soon as the business picks up. You know you can trust me." His words echoed in my mind as I remembered the day we sat in my kitchen, signing checks and making plans for the future. I cashed out everything, retirement, certificates, even sold some of your grandma's old jewelry. It took 3 weeks to pull together $275,000, but I did it because David was my son. I handed over the money with nothing but his promise and a handshake. "It's just until the business gets going, Dad. I'll pay you back every cent." Now, staring at the hospital bill and my dwindling bank account, I realized just how much trust can cost a person. My son's debt to me was almost exactly what I needed to save my own life. Maybe, I thought, he'd been waiting for a moment like this to prove he was good for his word. I drove through Tulsa's winding streets, past strip malls and neighborhoods where my son now lived in the house my money bought. Each mile was heavier than the last, burdened by hope and fear in equal measure. I pulled up behind David's shiny Ford and practiced what I'd say, clutching the hospital papers like a lifeline. He opened the door with a practiced smile, his wife Emily's laughter echoing from the kitchen. Their 2 kids ran through the hallway, barefoot on hardwood floors I'd never walked. The house was bright and comfortable, full of things I'd never owned, reminders of what I'd given up. "Dad, what brings you by?" David asked, looking at his watch before leading me to the living room. We sat, surrounded by new furniture and family photos. I tried to find my words as the smell of fresh coffee drifted in. "Son, I've got a problem. The doctors say I need heart surgery, and I don't have the money. I need you to repay that loan I gave you for this house. It's a matter of life and death." For a moment, David looked like a scared little boy. But it vanished as quickly as it came. He took a slow sip of his coffee, his eyes turning cold. "Dad, I can't just give you that kind of money. It's tied up in the house. You always said family was about helping each other, but I have kids to think about now." I felt the words like a slap. Emily stood in the doorway, quiet as a ghost, watching the moment a family began to break. My heart pounded, maybe from anger, maybe from fear. But you promised, son. You said it was a loan. David's jaw tightened. That was before, Dad. Things are different now. Maybe it's time you let go of all this. You've lived a good life, haven't you? The world spun. I could barely breathe. I stood, gripping the chair for balance, and looked at the family I'd built and now barely recognized. Without another word, I walked out into the hot Oklahoma afternoon, the ache in my chest growing deeper with every step. The ride back to my small house felt longer than ever before. I tried not to let anger turn to bitterness, but how could I not? My own flesh and blood, the boy I'd carried on my shoulders and taught how to tie his first fishing knot, had just told me that my life was less important than his comfort. As I drove, the Oklahoma landscape blurred past, red dirt roads, golden fields, old barns collapsing into the earth. Everything felt smaller now, more fragile. That night I barely slept. I kept replaying David's words, feeling the weight of each one. By morning, I was staring at old photo albums, birthdays, holidays, little league games, Emily in her wedding dress. I remembered the day David was born, the first time I held him. I'd promised to always be there for him. Now I wondered if I'd done too much, given too much, made things too easy. But self-pity was never my style. If my son wouldn't help me, maybe I could help myself. I started making phone calls. The bank. An old friend who once worked as a lawyer. My childhood buddy, Hank, who still lived a few towns over. By noon, I'd gathered every paper trail, bank statements, checks written to David, text messages where he'd promised to pay me back. I needed to know if there was anything I could do, any way to force his hand without destroying what was left of our family. Hank answered on the first ring. "Robert, you sound like you've seen a ghost." I told him everything, my diagnosis, the loan, David's refusal. Hank listened in silence, then let out a low whistle. "You know, I remember that day. I was there when he promised you, right there at your kitchen table. That's not just a father-son favor. That's a legal debt." A new sense of purpose sparked inside me. "Would you be willing to testify if it came to it, Hank?" "I'll do better than that. I'll help you find the best damn lawyer in Tulsa," he said, his voice steady. "David's a good kid, but he made a man's promise. He ought to keep it." Armed with Hank's support, I spent the next day scanning every document, organizing texts, and handwriting a timeline of what happened. My kitchen table looked like a war room. The more I worked, the stronger I felt. If David thought I'd go quietly, he'd forgotten who raised him. By Thursday morning, I was sitting in the small office of Janice Franklin, a local attorney known for being tough as nails. She listened patiently as I explained the situation, flipping through my evidence. "You have a strong case, Mr. Anderson. Family or not, a loan is a loan. If your friend is willing to testify, and you have these messages, we can file a civil suit for repayment." The thought of suing my own son twisted my stomach, but what choice did I have? "How long will it take?" 2 months, maybe 3. "Depends if he wants to fight or settle." She scribbled notes, then looked me in the eye. "I've seen a lot of families torn apart over money, but I've also seen good men get justice. You deserve that chance." I signed the retainer, feeling both hope and dread. When I stepped outside, the sun felt a little brighter. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way out of this nightmare. The next weeks became a blur of paperwork, late-night phone calls, and restless sleep. I saw less and less of David and his family. Emily stopped answering my calls, and the grandkids didn't come over anymore. But I pressed on, documenting, organizing, fighting through chest pain that came in waves. One afternoon, Hank drove over with 2 cups of bad gas station coffee and a notepad. "I wrote out my statement, Robert. I remember everything he said, word for word. You can count on me." We both signed it and took it to the bank to get notarized. The old teller remembered us from decades ago and stamped the papers with a wink. Good luck, boys. By Friday, Janice called me. We're ready to file. Everything's in place. Are you sure you want to go through with this? I looked around at the life I'd built, the empty house, the dusty baseball gloves on the mantel. I'm sure, I said. I have to do this. I have to live. Filing the lawsuit was easier than I expected, just a few signatures and a check for the court fees. But the emotional toll hit hard. I wasn't just fighting for money, I was fighting for my life, my dignity, and in some strange way, for my son's integrity. A week later, David called. His voice was cold, trembling with anger and fear. Dad, how could you do this? You're tearing the family apart. I kept my voice steady. You did that the moment you called my life a waste of money, son. This isn't just about me, it's about keeping your word. You'll never see your grandkids again. He threatened. You made that decision when you turned your back on me. I replied, surprised at my own strength. I hope one day you understand what a promise means. The line went dead, and with it, so did the last shreds of our old relationship. I sat on my porch that evening, watching the Oklahoma sky fade from orange to deep blue, the air thick with the scent of summer rain. I knew the battle was just beginning, but for the first time in weeks, I felt something close to peace. I'd spent my whole life building, sacrificing, hoping my family would stand by me in the end. Now I was fighting for a second chance, not just at life, but at justice. The lawsuit made its way through the Oklahoma courts faster than I expected. I'd always believed justice was slow, slower than a broken tractor in spring mud, but when a man's life is on the line, time seems to move differently. Janice, my lawyer, was tireless. She called me nearly every day with updates. David's lawyer wants a meeting, or we need to prepare for a possible hearing. Each call left my heart pounding, not just from the illness, but from the worry and hope mixed together. But not everyone in town understood. Some neighbors, old friends, stopped waving. Word travels fast in places like Stillwater, and rumors move even faster. Did you hear old Robert is suing his own son? One woman whispered at the grocery store. I pretended not to notice, but the look stung. It's a hard thing, being the talk of the town, especially for reasons you never imagined. Hank was my anchor. Every Sunday, he'd bring over a chessboard and 2 greasy burgers, and we'd sit on the porch, playing and talking about everything but the lawsuit. Sometimes, in the quiet, he'd squeeze my shoulder and remind me, "You're doing the right thing, Robert. If you won't fight for yourself, nobody else will." Those words meant more than he knew. Meanwhile, I pored over old paperwork, letters from my late wife, receipts for every big family expense, every birthday party, every Christmas. It struck me just how much one person can give without ever thinking about payback. My whole life was proof of that, and maybe that was my biggest mistake, assuming love and loyalty would always come back around. Then came the day of the court hearing. I wore my best shirt, the one my wife picked out for our 40th anniversary, the color of a summer sky. I arrived early, clutching my files, heart pounding like a drum. The courthouse was cold, full of echoing footsteps and tired faces. Janice led me into the small courtroom, where a stern-faced judge waited behind a stack of papers. David sat across the aisle, wearing a crisp suit that looked too new. Emily was beside him, her eyes red and distant. When our eyes met, he looked away. In that moment, I saw not the little boy I raised, but a stranger, tired, angry, and scared. Janice spoke first, laying out every detail, the loan, the promises, the texts, Hank's notarized witness statement. The next few weeks felt like living in the eye of a storm, strange, quiet, and tense. The lawsuit was filed. The county courthouse stamped it with all the weight of the state of Oklahoma behind it. Robert Anderson vs. David Anderson. Suddenly, my story was no longer private. It was a matter for the law. I kept myself busy with old habits, fixing up the shed, mowing the lawn, making too much coffee for one man. But each morning started and ended with paperwork. Janice called often. She wanted to be thorough. Every detail counts, Robert. They'll try to say it was a gift. They always do. That's why the witness statements, texts, and your careful records matter so much. It was strange how the legal process made everything feel clinical. Bank records, canceled checks, even family photos scanned and uploaded to evidence folders. My house turned into an archive of a broken promise. David's lawyer tried calling, too, a young man named Greg who talked fast and used phrases like amicable solution and avoiding unnecessary drama. I listened politely and told him the same thing each time. All I want is my loan repaid so I can get my surgery and stay alive. This isn't about revenge. But, of course, the phone calls from David stopped. The grandkids' birthdays came and went. I left gifts on the porch. No one ever opened the door. At night, I'd sit on the porch swing, clutching the hospital's payment letter and watching the neighbors walk their dogs, wondering if they guessed what was happening in my house. Through it all, Hank never left my side. He showed up twice a week with a box of donuts, his notebook full of memories from that day in my kitchen. They're gonna see justice, Robert, he'd say, trying to sound more confident than he felt. Court day approached faster than I expected. I ironed my best shirt, same one I'd worn to David's high school graduation. It barely fit now, the years having changed my shape, but I wore it anyway. Hank drove me into Tulsa, the courthouse looming over us, red brick and white columns against a steel-gray sky. Inside, the air was thick with quiet tension. Lawyers paced, judges called names, families argued in huddled groups. Janice guided me through metal detectors and into a long hallway lined with faded portraits of men who looked as serious as the situation itself. Our case was called to courtroom 4. The room itself was plain, rows of benches, a judge's bench polished to a dull shine, flags standing silent in the corners. David sat at the far table with his lawyer, his face drawn and older than I remembered. Emily wasn't there. I wondered if she'd left him to face this on his own, or if she simply couldn't bear to see it. The judge, a woman in her late 50s with tired eyes, listened carefully as Janice laid out our evidence, the text messages, the witness statement from Hank, the canceled checks, and, most importantly, David's written acknowledgement in the messages. "Dad, this is a loan, not a gift. I'll pay you back." She read the words out loud, and for a moment, I saw David's shoulders slump. David's lawyer tried to argue that family help wasn't the same as a business contract, that gifts between close relatives are common. But Janice was relentless. There is nothing more binding than a man's promise to his own father, especially when it's put in writing and witnessed. This is not about a gift. It's about responsibility. When I took the stand, my hands shook, but my voice was steady. I told the truth. I helped my son because I believed in him. But he promised he'd pay me back. Now I'm not asking for charity, I just want to live. The money I gave him is the only thing that stands between me and the surgery that will save my life. Hank testified next, firm and honest as always. I was there that morning. David said it was a loan, and he'd pay it back. We all heard it. The cross-examination was short. David's lawyer had nothing to counter the written words, the bank records, or Hank's testimony. After a short recess, the judge returned and delivered her verdict in a voice as clear as church bells on Sunday. The court finds in favor of the plaintiff. The defendant is ordered to repay $275,000 within 30 days, or surrender the property purchased with said funds for immediate sale. The law is clear, a promise, once made, must be honored. I sat there stunned. It was over. Or so I thought. Outside the courthouse, David caught up to me, his voice cracking with years of unspoken pain. "Dad, I'm sorry. I didn't think it would come to this. I just..." I didn't know what to do. I looked at him, my son, the man I'd built my life around. Sometimes, son, the only way to teach a lesson is to let people face the consequences. I hope you understand now. He wiped his eyes. I'll get the money. Even if I have to sell the house. I'm sorry, Dad. For the first time since all this began, I believed he meant it. Back home, I called Dr. Carter's office. We can schedule your surgery as soon as payment clears, she said. Relief washed over me, cold, pure, almost enough to make me weep. A week later, the house sold, fast, as houses in Tulsa often do. David brought a cashier's check to my door, his hands trembling. For you, Dad. For everything. We stood there, either of us knowing what to say. I hugged him, because life's too short for grudges. The next days were a blur. Pre-op appointments, phone calls from the hospital, well wishes from Hank and Janice. I left a voicemail for Emily, hoping she'd let the grandkids know Grandpa was going to be okay. The night before my operation, I sat on the porch, the summer air thick with the sound of crickets and distant thunder. I thought about all the sacrifices, all the pain, and all the ways family can heal as quickly as it can wound. I wasn't sure what would happen tomorrow. But for the first time in months, I felt hope blooming in my chest, hope that I'd wake up and see my son again, and maybe, just maybe, start over. The morning of the surgery arrived with a quiet sense of finality. I'd spent a lifetime believing I was tough, an Oklahoma oil man, after all, but nothing quite prepares you for the reality of facing your own mortality. I watched the sun rise over the neighbor's fence, felt the cool breeze brush my cheek, and tried not to wonder if it might be the last time. Hank insisted on driving me to the hospital. Somebody's gotta make sure you don't chicken out and run for the hills, he joked, but his hands were tied on the steering wheel. We didn't say much on the way there. 30 years of friendship means you don't have to fill the silence. Inside, the hospital buzzed with that anxious energy unique to places where lives are balanced on a razor's edge. Dr. Carter met me in pre-op, her confidence steadier than I could ever manage. We're ready for you, Mr. Anderson. Everything is paid. We're going to take good care of you. Lying in the pre-op room, my mind raced. I thought about the house I'd given up, about David, about the grandkids I hadn't seen in weeks. I wondered if they missed me, if Emily told them why Grandpa had stopped coming around. I didn't blame her. This wasn't the story you want kids to remember. I made a promise to myself. If I made it out, I tried to be the kind of father and grandfather they deserved. Maybe not the richest, but at least the most present. The anesthesia came quick. 1 minute I was staring at the ceiling tiles, the next I was drifting off, listening to Dr. Carter's voice fading like an old country song on the radio. I woke up to a world transformed. My chest ached, felt like I'd been run over by a herd of cattle, but the pain was different, cleaner. Alive. The first face I saw was Hank's, blurry around the edges, but smiling. Welcome back, old man. You look like hell, but you're still breathing. That's something. Recovery wasn't easy. I spent 3 weeks in and out of the hospital, learning to breathe again, to walk again, to trust my own heart. Hank visited every day. Emily even brought the kids by once, just for a few minutes, but enough to remind me why I'd fought so hard. David called, too. He was quieter, more serious. Dad, I've been thinking a lot. About what happened. About what I said. There was a long pause. You were right. I was selfish. I let fear get in the way of doing what was right. I hope you can forgive me. I thought about all the years I'd spent forgiving others. I realized forgiveness wasn't just for the other person, it was for me, too. I forgive you, son. Life's too short to keep carrying stones in your heart. We started seeing each other more after that. At first, it was awkward, like learning to speak again after too many years of silence. But we tried. That's what mattered. Emily warmed up, too, and the grandkids remembered how much they liked sitting on Grandpa's lap, listening to stories about oil rigs and wild thunderstorms. Janice called to check on me. "You did the hard thing, Robert. Most men would have given up. But you fought for your life, and you taught your son a lesson he'll never forget." The summer rolled into fall, and I found myself looking forward to things again: Sunday dinners, baseball games on the radio, teaching my grandson how to bait a hook. The house I'd lost in Tulsa didn't matter anymore. Home wasn't a place. It was the people you loved and the moments you shared. One evening, David stopped by with a toolbox in hand. "Figured you might want to fix up the porch swing. Kids keep saying it squeaks." We worked together in the fading light, just like we used to, not saying much, but letting the silence heal the wounds. There was still pain. Some things never go away. But every day, the bitterness faded a little more. I learned to count my blessings, to let go of the things I couldn't change, and to hold tight to the people who still cared. One night, as I watched the stars from my porch, I realized something simple and profound. Life will break you, sometimes more than once, but if you keep getting back up, if you keep fighting for what matters, there's always a way forward. And in that quiet Oklahoma night, with my heart beating strong and steady, I finally felt at peace. As the weeks passed and the weather cooled, I settled into a quieter rhythm. Recovery had given me plenty of time to think about the future, not just mine, but David's too. I knew he was struggling to pick up the pieces after selling the house. He moved his family into a modest place on the edge of Tulsa, not nearly as grand as the one my loan had bought. Still, I could see a change in him. He was humbler, more thoughtful, careful with his words and his choices. One Sunday morning, David called and asked if he could stop by. When he arrived, I found him standing on the porch steps, hands shoved deep in his pockets, hair mussed by the Oklahoma wind. "I brought someone with me," he said. Behind him, my grandson, Ethan, clutched a baseball glove and wore a hopeful grin. "Grandpa, Dad says you used to pitch for the church team. Think you could show me how to throw a curveball?" Ethan's eyes sparkled with the same eager energy I'd seen in David years ago. We walked to the backyard, the grass a little long but soft underfoot. I dusted off my old mitt, slipped it onto my still tender hand, and started tossing the ball. For a while, all the tension and heartache melted away. Ethan laughed every time he missed a catch, and David watched from the porch, his face finally relaxed. After a while, David joined us. We tossed the ball around, swapping stories, teasing each other, and sharing the easy silence of men mending what was once broken. When the sun started to dip below the trees, we sat on the porch with lemonade and let the cicadas fill the quiet. "Dad," David said after a long pause, "I know I can't ever make up for what happened. But I want you to know I'm trying. I got a new job, steady work this time. Emily's been working nights at the diner. We're saving up, doing things right." I nodded, pride mixing with relief. "It's not about the money, son. It never really was. I just wanted to know you'd stand by your word. That you'd be the kind of man your kids could look up to." David's eyes glistened, and he blinked hard. "I'm working on it. I promise." That evening, after they left, I sat alone on the porch, thinking about all the fathers and sons who never got a second chance. Life gives you scars, but it also gives you moments like that, moments when you see the good growing out of the pain. A few days later, I received a letter from the hospital. Dr. Carter wrote a brief note congratulating me on my recovery and reminding me to come in for follow-ups. At the bottom, in her neat script, she'd added, "You're living proof that hope and determination can beat the odds. Keep moving forward, Mr. Anderson." Those words stuck with me. I realized I'd spent so many years looking backward, at regrets, old hurts, and what-ifs, that I'd almost forgotten how to look ahead. Hank came by that week with a bag of groceries and a grin. "Heard you've been teaching young Ethan how to throw. You think you can still beat me in a pitching contest?" I laughed, the kind of laugh that bubbles up from a place untouched by worry. You'd throw your arm out before you made it halfway to the plate, old man. We set up some paint cans at the end of the yard and took turns throwing. Neither of us hit much, but we made enough noise that the neighbors peeked over the fence to watch. It felt good, really good, to be alive and laughing again. Later, sitting in the kitchen over coffee, Hank turned serious. You know, Robert, a lot of folks in your shoes would have just given up. Let bitterness eat them alive. But you fought. You kept your dignity, even when it meant taking your own boy to court. That took guts. I shrugged. Sometimes you don't have a choice. Life backs you into a corner, you either fight your way out or you don't make it. I just wish it hadn't come to that. Hank nodded, understanding without needing more words. He stood and clapped me on the shoulder. You're tougher than any oil field I ever worked. Remember that. That night, I dug out a notebook and began to write a letter to my grandkids for them to read when they were older. I wanted them to know who I was, what I'd learned, and that even good people make mistakes. I wrote about forgiveness, about second chances, and about the kind of strength it takes to hold your family together when everything is falling apart. As the days grew shorter and the air turned crisp, I made peace with the past. I focused on small joys, Ethan's laughter, Emily's thank you pies left on my porch, David's quiet determination. I learned that you can't control everything in life, but you can choose how you respond. That's what makes all the difference. Sometimes you have to lose almost everything to discover what really matters. As fall faded into winter, life kept moving forward. My health improved slowly but surely. Each week brought longer walks, stronger steps, and less pain in my chest. My hair was a little whiter, my hands a little more weathered, but I felt younger than I had in years. Most mornings started with coffee on the porch, watching flocks of birds rise from the frosted fields, thinking about how close I'd come to missing these simple things. David called more often now. Sometimes he'd stop by after work, bringing Ethan or little Sarah to visit. Emily even started baking again. She'd show up at my door with warm apple bread or a tin of homemade cookies, her smile less forced, her words less guarded. Our family, battered and bruised, was healing. One chilly Saturday, David asked if I could watch the kids while he and Emily took care of some errands. I didn't hesitate for a second. Ethan and Sarah came bursting through the door, their laughter echoing through my small house. We made pancakes, built a fort out of couch cushions, and I read them old cowboy stories by the fire. It was chaos, and I loved every second. Later, while the kids colored at the kitchen table, Ethan looked up and asked, "Grandpa, are you ever sad that you don't live in the big house anymore?" I smiled and ruffled his hair. Homes aren't about size, kiddo. They're about the people in them. As long as I've got you and your daddy and your sister coming around, this place feels bigger than any mansion. He grinned, toothy and honest. When I grow up, I want to live close to you. Sarah nodded, stuffing another cookie in her mouth. Me too, Grandpa. It was a small moment, but one I knew I'd remember for the rest of my days. When David came back that afternoon, he lingered at the door, watching the kids chase each other in the yard. You know, Dad, I never realized how much I took for granted. The money, the house, even you. I'm sorry it took losing so much to finally wake up. I put a hand on his shoulder. It's never too late to start again, son. We can't go back, but we can make the future better. David nodded. His jaw set with the kind of resolve I remembered from his younger days. I want to do right by you. By my family. I've started saving for the kids' college funds. Got a side job on weekends, too. Emily and I talk more now, really talk. I guess sometimes you have to hit bottom before you remember what matters most. We sat for a while, just watching the kids. The sun hung low and gold in the sky, and the cold air turned our breath to smoke. It was peaceful, the kind of peace I had chased for years. Holidays approached, bringing new traditions. Thanksgiving was simple but warm: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and laughter echoing through my tiny kitchen. David carved the bird, Ethan passed the rolls, and for the first time in a long while, it felt like family again. After dinner, I pulled out my old guitar and played songs I hadn't touched since David was a boy. Sarah danced, Ethan clapped along, and Emily sang softly. Even Hank showed up, bringing his famous pumpkin pie and that stubborn optimism I'd come to rely on. After everyone had gone home, I sat alone by the dying fire, feeling gratitude so deep it ached. I remembered the fear and despair that had nearly swallowed me whole just a few months before. Now life was full again, not perfect, but real, and all the sweeter for what we'd survived. As Christmas neared, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened. The lawsuit, the surgery, the heartbreak, it all seemed like another life. I wrapped presents for the grandkids, wrote a letter to David expressing my pride, and even sent a card to Janice and Dr. Carter, thanking them for helping save my life. On Christmas Eve, the whole family gathered in my living room. The tree was crooked and the lights blinked unevenly, but nobody cared. We sang carols, told stories, and when it came time to open gifts, the kids' laughter filled the house to the rafters. David handed me a small box, wrapped in blue paper. Inside was a simple silver keychain, engraved with the words, "Thank you for never giving up on me." I swallowed hard, overcome. "You don't have to thank me, son. That's what fathers do." He hugged me, and I held him tight, realizing that forgiveness, though a hard one, had finally stitched us back together. That night, after everyone had gone home and the house was quiet, I sat by the window and watched the snow drift down. I realized how precious it all was: family, second chances, and the knowledge that, even after the hardest storms, the sun will rise again. The new year dawned cold and clear. As January sunlight poured through my kitchen window, I felt a peace I hadn't known in years. My life had changed forever, but for the first time in a long time, I was grateful for where the changes had led me. David stopped by one frosty Saturday with both kids in tow. He looked more himself than I'd seen since before all the trouble, his eyes clearer, his shoulders squared, a quiet confidence in his every move. "Dad, mind if I take a look at that leaky faucet?" he asked. "I think it's about time I earned my keep around here." We worked together, tools scattered on the floor, Sarah playing with her dolls beside us while Ethan peppered me with questions about oil rigs and the wild old days. David fixed the faucet with a few swift moves, then looked at me, almost sheepish. "You know, I always thought I had to do everything on my own. Turns out, I was just too proud to ask for help, or to admit when I'd screwed up." I squeezed his shoulder, pride warming me more than the sun streaming in. "Takes real strength to face your mistakes, son. All that matters is what you do next." He grinned. "Well, what I want to do next is make sure my family never goes through something like that again." After they left, I took a long walk around the neighborhood. I passed the spot where, not so long ago, I'd worried I wouldn't live to see another spring. I thought about the times I'd almost given in to despair, and about the people who'd helped pull me back: Hank, Janice, Dr. Carter, and most of all, David and the grandkids. I realized something: every second chance is a kind of gift, but you have to be willing to fight for it. In March, the local paper did a small feature about my story. "Old Man Fights for His Life and His Family," the headline read. People I hadn't seen in years sent letters, called to check in, or even stopped me at the grocery store to say they were rooting for me. Some told me about their own family rifts, broken promises, old grudges, missed opportunities. I listened to every story, nodded, and told them what I'd learned. The hardest thing you'll ever do is forgive someone who hurt you. But the only thing harder is living with regret if you never try. Spring came early that year. I started planting a small garden, turning the soil by hand just to feel the earth. Ethan and Sarah helped, their hands dirty, their laughter echoing across the yard. We planted tomatoes, beans, sunflowers. Watching them grow, I thought about all the things that take root when you tend them with patience, trust, hope, family. By summer, the Anderson family was closer than it had been in decades. We had Sunday cookouts, birthdays with too much cake, and long evenings spent on the porch telling stories and watching fireflies blink against the Oklahoma twilight. David had gotten a promotion at work. Emily was studying to become a nurse, inspired by the care she saw during my recovery. The grandkids grew taller, smarter, funnier by the day. Hank still dropped by, always with a story or a joke, sometimes just to sit in silence and watch the sky. "You know, Robert," he said one night, "not many folks get a real second chance. You made yours count." That autumn, I finally finished the letter I'd started for my grandkids. I wrote about the value of a promise, about working hard, about never being too proud to say you're sorry or too stubborn to forgive. I told them that family is worth fighting for, even when it hurts. I tucked the letter away for them to find someday, hoping it might help them avoid my mistakes. When Thanksgiving rolled around again, our little house was bursting with laughter and the smell of roasting turkey. After dinner, as we sat around the table, David raised his glass. "To family, the ones who stand by us, who forgive us, and who remind us that we're never alone, no matter how lost we feel." Everyone clinked glasses. For a moment, I looked around and saw not just what I'd lost, but all that I'd regained: a family rebuilt, a son restored, and a future that felt wide open. As the first snow of winter fell outside, I sat by the fire with Sarah curled up on my lap, Ethan reading a book at my feet, and David and Emily sipping coffee across the room. I realized that sometimes, the hardest roads lead to the most beautiful destinations. If there's one thing I learned through it all, it's this: never give up on the people you love. Even when they break your heart, even when the odds are against you. Because in the end, forgiveness is the only thing that can truly heal a family. And as I watched the snow gather on the windowpane, I knew that whatever time I had left, I would spend it exactly where I belonged, surrounded by those who mattered most.